Hi, my name's Michael. 3 years ago, I signed a divorce paper in silence after her parents waved 700 grand in my face like I was cheap. They said it was to keep the peace, but really, it was to keep me gone. She was pregnant, with twins she swore weren't mine. I disappeared like they wanted, until the truth found them. Now, they're the ones hiding. But back then, no one asked me what it felt like to be erased. Would you have walked away if you knew they'd built the whole lie on your children? I've always been the kind of man who believes that order keeps things from falling apart. I like arriving on time. I like knowing where I'm supposed to sit, what's expected of me, when to speak, and when not to. Family dinners at my parents-in-law's house used to follow that rhythm. Same long dining table. Same polished surface that reflected the chandelier just enough to feel formal, but not cold. Same unspoken rule that whatever tension existed stayed beneath the surface. That evening looked no different at first. I arrived just before dusk, parked where I always did, walked up the familiar stone path. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary hung in the air. Plates were already set. Candles were lit, not for romance, but for presentation. This was a family that cared about appearances. I took off my coat, greeted everyone with the usual nods and quiet smiles. And that's when I noticed it. One chair was pulled slightly back from the table, not removed, not gone, just displaced. Enough that it broke the symmetry. No one said anything about it. No one rushed to adjust it. Conversations continued as if nothing was out of place. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. A gesture, a comment, anything that would tell me whether it was meant for me or not. Nothing came. So I did what I've always done. I adjusted myself. I took a seat farther down, one I'd never used before. I told myself it was a mistake, that someone must have bumped the chair while setting the table. I didn't ask. Asking would have slowed things down. Asking would have drawn attention. The food was passed around. Glasses were filled. The sound of silverware against porcelain filled the spaces where words didn't quite reach. They started talking about plans. Not small talk. Not the weather. Real plans. Travel. Financial arrangements. Where holidays would be spent this year. What made sense going forward. My wife sat across from me, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look up when these decisions were mentioned. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table, as if studying the grain of the wood. I waited for my name to come up. It didn't. They talked about my marriage as if it were a logistical issue, not something I was part of. Phrases like moving forward and best for everyone floated around the table. Someone mentioned how complicated things had become. Another voice said it was time to simplify. Still, no one looked at me. I tried to pinpoint the moment when I stopped being included. It felt recent, but also like something that had been building quietly, without my noticing. Like erosion. Slow, polite, and deliberate. I told myself to stay calm. This was just a conversation. Families talk this way sometimes. I'd always believed that maturity meant not reacting to every discomfort. Keeping the peace mattered, especially in families like this, where conflict didn't disappear, it just got remembered. I'd learned that lesson early in life. As the youngest son, I grew up adapting, listening more than speaking, watching how moods shifted and adjusting accordingly. Silence had never felt like weakness to me. It felt like control. But that night, silence sat heavier. At one point, my mother-in-law glanced in my direction, not quite meeting my eyes, and said, "We'll sort out the details later. Tonight is about family. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Family. I understood then that I was being spoken around not to. Included in the room, but excluded from the definition. There was no anger in the statement, no accusation. Just a boundary quietly drawn. Dinner continued. Laughter rose at moments that didn't quite reach me. I chewed, swallowed, nodded when appropriate. From the outside, I probably looked composed, reliable. The same man I'd always been at that table. Inside, something shifted. As the evening wound down, plates were cleared and chairs scraped softly against the floor. People stood, stretched, moved toward the living room. The empty chair remained where it was. No one pushed it back in. I lingered a moment longer, my hand resting on the back of the chair I'd used instead. I looked at the space where the other chair stood, slightly apart, still untouched. That was when it became clear. It hadn't been misplaced. It had been set aside. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last dinner where they still pretended I belonged. The next time they invited me over, the lawyer was already waiting. It wasn't their house this time. It was an office building in Manhattan, the kind with mirrored glass and a lobby that smelled like money. When I stepped out of the elevator, I already knew something was off. No one invites you to a quick conversation and books a corner office. The receptionist didn't ask who I was. She stood up the moment I walked in, gave me a tight smile, and pointed me toward a frosted glass door at the end of the hall. The handle was cool in my hand. I opened it slowly. Inside, the room was still. Too still. A pot of untouched coffee sat on the table. Leather chairs. Windows that looked down on traffic like it was all background noise. My wife was already seated. So was her father. And the man I didn't recognize? He was the one sitting with his legs crossed like he belonged there. No one stood up. No hand was extended. Her father gestured loosely to the seat across from him. "Glad you could make it." I sat, slowly, cautiously. I looked at her, at my wife, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. Not even for a second. She just stared at the table like there was something important written in the wood grain. The stranger adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I'm David Rosen. I represent the family's legal interests. Not your wife's interests, not her name. Just the family." I nodded once, mostly out of habit. Still trying to be civil, Rosen folded his hands on the table. "This doesn't have to take long." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a discussion. This was a delivery. Everything was prepared. A folder already open in front of him. Yellow legal pad with bullet points. I hadn't been invited here to understand anything. I'd been summoned to agree. He spoke in a calm, rehearsed tone. Every sentence ended like it was already agreed upon. This is about ensuring clarity, minimizing disruption, and moving toward a clean and efficient separation. I didn't say a word. I just listened. Tried to keep my breathing even. He went on, laying out terms like he was reading from a script. "There's no contention here. We're not discussing infidelity, emotional harm, or fault. We're addressing logistics. Everyone involved simply wants what's best moving forward." Everyone involved. That was rich. No one raised their voice. They didn't need to. It was the kind of control that didn't show its teeth. Wealth has a way of turning cruelty into courtesy. Then it happened. Without a word, my father-in-law reached into his briefcase and pulled out a check. He placed it on the table, face up. Neat. Casual. $700,000. I didn't lean forward. I didn't touch it. I just stared. He spoke plainly. This is a gesture of goodwill. We'd like to see things resolved quickly and without unnecessary friction. A gesture, as if this was a farewell party. I didn't move. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but I could feel a buzzing in my ears, like static just beneath the surface. My skin burned hot while my chest went cold. I wasn't being compensated. I was being erased. The check sat between us like a verdict, like someone had weighed my life, my marriage, the years I spent showing up, staying quiet, believing in this family, and come up with a number. No one explained the amount. No one justified it, because they didn't feel they needed to. They weren't offering me closure. They were offering silence. Of course, Rosen continued, acceptance of this payment includes a few conditions. Confidentiality, obviously, and a mutual understanding that you will not contest any future proceedings or initiate claims. He said it like it was standard. I looked around the room again. My wife hadn't moved. Her shoulders were tight, her eyes still fixed on the grain of the table. Her father sat back like the matter was settled. The lawyer waited, pen in hand, like this was the part where I nodded and signed. I said nothing, not because I agreed, but because I realized what kind of play this was. This wasn't about money. This was about making it clean for them, sanitized, quick, no headlines, no shame. They wanted me to walk away with a check and a quiet goodbye. They wanted me to disappear before the rest came out. But I wasn't ready to vanish. I glanced at the check one last time. $700,000. And not a single word that sounded like sorry. They thought the money would end the conversation. Instead, it was when I finally stopped hearing anything else. I left the building without saying a word. The sidewalk was busy, but the noise didn't register. Honking cars, chatter, footsteps, it all felt like it was happening behind glass. I walked until my feet hurt, then sat on a bench near Columbus Circle just to breathe. I should have felt something, anger, rage, even relief. But there was just a heavy blankness, like a radio left on static, the kind of quiet that follows an explosion. I don't remember the train ride back to Westchester. I got off at the same stop as always, walked to my car, parked in the same spot, started it without thinking. My hands followed routine even while my head was somewhere else entirely. By the time I got back to the apartment, the sun was long gone. I didn't turn on the lights, just dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, took off my jacket, and sat on the edge of the couch. The silence inside was louder than the street. I didn't unpack. I didn't shower. I just sat. My phone lit up around 11:08 p.m. I didn't move. Let it ring once, twice. I stared at the screen. Her name. I watched it go to voicemail. I told myself I'd listen in the morning, that I was too tired, too numb, too... Whatever excuse made it feel like waiting was an act of control. But the truth was simple. I wasn't ready to hear her voice and feel nothing in return. I sat in that same position for over an hour. The apartment stayed dark. At some point, I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and just stood there, holding it like it would remind me I was still here. It was almost 1 a.m. when I played it. Her voice came through soft, controlled, like she'd rehearsed it. Hey, I didn't think you'd answer. I figured this was better anyway. Pause. I just wanted you to hear this from me, not anyone else. I know today wasn't easy. For what it's worth, it wasn't easy for me either. Another pause, longer this time. There are some things you can't say across a table. You just can't. So I'm saying them now. She didn't apologize, not really. She didn't cry. She talked like someone giving directions. Calm, measured. There's no blame here. Things change. People grow in different directions. I've made my peace with it. I hope, one day, you will too. She never said my name, not once. It felt like a conversation that had already happened somewhere else, without me. No, I miss you. No, let's talk. Just closure. Wrapped in soft tones and vague kindness, like that would make it hurt less. I listened twice, then again, trying to find something underneath, some crack in her voice, some sign that she didn't believe what she was saying. There was nothing. I didn't delete it, not out of sentiment, but because it was proof, not of what she'd done, but of what she'd become, detached, efficient, just like her father, just like that lawyer in the office with the too perfect haircut. She'd chosen their version of peace, their definition of what was best moving forward. And me? I was the mess she didn't want to clean up. I thought back to growing up as the youngest in a house full of loud opinions. I was the quiet one, the easy one, the one who didn't need much, the one who adapted. Turns out, people like that are the easiest to forget. I'd been making myself small for years, thinking it was maturity, thinking it was love. And now I understood what that really buys you. A chair that gets pushed aside, a meeting you don't ask for, a check on a table, and a voicemail that doesn't even use your name. I didn't respond. I didn't call back. I just sat with it. The kind of silence that no amount of money can fill. Later that night, I lay on the couch, still dressed, the phone next to me, face down. The voicemail stayed. And I knew it would echo in my head far longer than anything said in that law office ever could. If the check took my marriage, the next document would take something even worse. I woke up just before dawn. Not from sleep. I hadn't really slept, but from the weight of knowing what came next. My body moved through the motions, shower, shave, shirt, slacks. It was mechanical, like dressing for a funeral I wasn't invited to. By 9:15, I was back in that same glass and marble office. The receptionist gave a tight smile, said they were expecting me. Of course they were. Inside, the same attorney sat at the same table. His tie was a different shade, but the performance was the same. A practiced calm, polished and cold. A single thick folder sat in front of him this time, sealed but inviting, like a gift I didn't ask for. He gestured to the seat across from him without a word. I sat. The folder slid across the smooth wood with a whisper. "This version reflects the final agreed-upon terms," he said. "No, how are you?" No small talk. I opened it. There were more pages now. The weight of the paper alone told me things had changed. My eyes skimmed lines about division of assets, liabilities, waivers, until I found a section labeled Non-Interference and Future Separation Agreement. I read it once, then again. It was written like every other clause, precise, clinical, but the content hit differently. I wasn't just being divorced. I was being removed. The clause stated in careful legalese that I agreed to maintain no ongoing contact, direct or indirect, with my wife, her family, any future offspring, or associated parties. That I would not present myself physically, electronically, or verbally in any context related to her life going forward. There was no mention of children, yet, but the phrase future dependents and legal interests made it clear. This wasn't about a clean break. This was erasure. I looked up. The lawyer's face didn't flinch. "This is standard in high-conflict situations. It protects both parties." My mouth was dry. "High conflict?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. This wasn't about what had happened. It was about control, about preempting any possibility that I might complicate the story they wanted to tell. I turned back to the pages. I wasn't just losing a wife. I was being written out of a life, one that wasn't even fully lived yet. My chest tightened. Not from anger, but from something slower, deeper, like a rope pulling from the inside. What would it cost to fight this? I could contest it, hire a lawyer, drag it out. But then what? More meetings, more money, a media mess if they wanted one. And her, my wife or whoever she'd become, framing it all as my refusal to move on. They'd win, even if I didn't sign. That was the genius of it. I wasn't being threatened, not out loud, but everything in that room, the silent confidence, the thickness of the packet, the assumption I'd accept it, carried the same message. Sit down, sign quietly, leave everything behind. I closed the folder. My hands stayed flat on the table. I looked at the man across from me and asked, "Why add that clause now?" A pause. He adjusted his pen. "Let's just say, it's what everyone believes will lead to the cleanest resolution." Everyone? He didn't answer, but his eyes told me enough. They wanted this signed before anything else came out, before timelines overlapped, before questions were asked, before it became clear that what they were really protecting wasn't her future, but their version of the past. I didn't sign. Not yet. Instead, I stood, gathered the folder, slipped it into my briefcase without a word. He didn't try to stop me. As I reached the door, he added, "Of course, we hope to finalize this by end of week." I didn't turn around. I stepped into the hallway and out into the light. The air felt different, thinner. Something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just losing my place at the table. I was being erased from the room entirely. And I hadn't even begun to fight yet. That night, I learned how easy it is to disappear, if you don't fight it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the light had already changed. The late fall sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch I used to share with her. I sat in the car for a while, engine off, keys still in the ignition, letting the silence settle around me like dust in an old attic. I didn't want to move. Not yet. They hadn't forced me. That's what I told myself. No one had yelled. No one had threatened. But somehow, I still walked back into that sterile office 2 days later and signed my name across every page like it didn't belong to me anymore. The attorney barely looked up. He had a blue pen ready, already uncapped, as if he knew I wouldn't bring my own. There were no questions, no explanations, just signatures, initials, and the quiet thud of each page turning. It was done in 12 minutes. 12. I took the manila envelope he slid across the table, the one with copies of the agreement, the check receipt, and a brochure from some post-divorce financial consultant I never asked for. I didn't even open it, just folded it once, tucked it under my arm, and walked out like I'd forgotten my own footsteps. The fall air was colder than it should have been, but maybe that was just me. There was no feeling of freedom, no anger, no peace, just absence. Like I'd been quietly folded out of the picture, and the frame kept hanging there like nothing had changed. The check cleared the next day. I didn't look at the balance. I didn't need to. I knew what it meant. Not payment, not apology. Permission to disappear. What I didn't expect, what I was too naive to prepare for, was how fast the story spread. The official version made its rounds before I'd even had a chance to delete her contact from my phone. It was clean, sanitized, polished. Friends I hadn't heard from in months reached out, not to ask how I was, but to share some variation of the same line. I heard it just didn't work out, that you decided to take some time for yourself. Take time for myself? I laughed once, out loud, in the parking lot of a grocery store when I got a text that said exactly that. I stared at the screen, rereading the words, noticing the vocabulary, straight out of the document I'd signed. Mutual resolution. Peaceful uncoupling. Voluntary withdrawal from future obligations. They were quoting my silence back to me like it was a choice. No one asked me what happened, not once. I stopped getting invited to things. Cookouts, work dinners. Even my brother's birthday party came and went without a text. I wasn't angry, just aware. Absence becomes normal faster than you think. And when no one asks for your side, you start wondering if you ever really had one. The worst part? I didn't fight it. That thought landed harder than I expected. Late one night, alone on the couch, lights off, TV muted, I let that sentence roll through my head on repeat. I didn't fight it. Why didn't I? Was it shame? Fear? Was I too tired? Or had I spent so many years trying to be the one who didn't make waves that I forgot how to swim against any current? I thought back to all the times I stayed quiet when I could have spoken up. All the little compromises I made in the name of being understanding. All the space I gave, hoping it would earn me closeness. All it earned me was distance. And now I sat in a quiet apartment with a folder full of paperwork and a silence I'd helped build brick by brick. I reached for that envelope once more, opened it, pulled the papers out and laid them flat on the coffee table. The signatures looked like someone else's handwriting, the words sterile and unforgiving. Then I saw it. Her name, under mine, bold, unmoved. I used to love the way she wrote her name. There was a little curve at the end of her Y, something only I noticed, something I used to tease her about. But here, in black and white, it looked cold, legal, like even her signature had stepped back from me. I sat there until the coffee I never finished went cold. Then I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer I kept old warranties and expired coupons in. It felt fitting. I told myself this was peace. This, right here. The quiet, the stillness, the lack of conflict. It was what peace must look like. But deep down, some small voice, one I hadn't listened to in years, whispered something different. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like vanishing. And I thought disappearing would end the damage. I was wrong. Weeks passed like fog, shapeless, slow, and hard to measure. I went to work, I made coffee, I fed the dog, I answered emails with one-sentence replies, nodded politely when the neighbors waved, and refilled prescriptions when the bottles got light. It looked like life. From the outside, it passed for routine. But inside, it was all theater. Everything was autopilot. I didn't feel sadness anymore. Not exactly. Just the steady hum of absence, like background static I'd gotten used to. Some nights, I'd open the drawer where I kept the signed documents. I wouldn't read them. I just needed to see they were still there. Proof that it really happened. That I hadn't dreamed it all in some fevered nightmare. I didn't expect anything to change. Not then. Until a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a bland waiting room, flipping through outdated magazines while waiting for a routine checkup. The nurse called my name, and I followed her back. She tapped something on the computer and smiled casually. "So we're still managing the thyroid, right? No new medications from your wife's end?" I looked up. My wife? Sorry, she said quickly, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. It's just, we had her listed as your emergency contact from last year's file. It still says married here. I thought maybe. I nodded once, slow. It's fine. But it wasn't. I walked out of that office with a printed copy of my chart in my coat pocket, heartbeat a little too loud in my ears. It wasn't what she said. It was what didn't fit. Her name shouldn't have been there. Not after what we signed. According to the agreement, every trace of me was to be removed from her world, and vice versa. Clean, final, permanent. And yet, there it was. Still listed, still tied to mine. I spent the drive home trying to talk myself down. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe the systems hadn't caught up. Maybe the nurse just read an old field and spoke too quickly. But a part of me, the part that used to notice everything before I made a habit of stepping back, wouldn't let it go. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope again. This time, I pulled every page out. I read them slowly, methodically. I looked at dates, signatures, timelines, and then I saw it. In a copy of a medical affidavit, something I hadn't even realized they'd included, there was a date, a test result, but it didn't match the timeline she'd given me, the one she'd used to explain her absence, her withdrawal, the subtle emotional fade that preceded the papers. The test was dated 3 months before she claimed to even suspect anything. 3 months before she started avoiding dinners, before the late-night work meetings, before the voicemail that ended it all. It meant she knew. And she said nothing. Not only that, she'd moved pieces around me, quietly, months in advance. I sat very still. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't hurt feelings. This was documentation. I stared at the line of data for a long time, letting the weight of it settle in. Then I checked the date on a second copy, a pharmacy statement, another discrepancy. And just like that, the air shifted. This wasn't about marriage anymore. It wasn't even about the check. This was about something else, something bigger, something I wasn't meant to see, and they'd missed it. Not because I was clever, but because they thought I was gone. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't email her or her family or the firm that orchestrated this erasure. I did nothing because I needed time, because I understood instinctively that if I made the wrong move now, the window would close. Instead, I organized every piece of paper I had. I made copies. I took photos. I bookmarked legal definitions I didn't fully understand yet, but would soon. I placed the original documents into a new envelope, labeled it, taped it shut, and slid it into the bottom drawer of the old file cabinet by the window, the one no one ever looked at. The fear didn't come in loud. It wasn't panic. It was quieter than that. It was the fear that comes when you realize you were never just let go. You were managed, moved, handled, and now I was holding something that proved it. I sat there in the stillness of my apartment, hands resting on my knees, breathing steady. The lights were low. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel numb. I felt clear. They thought I was finished. I was just getting precise. I didn't change much, not outwardly. Still made coffee in the same chipped mug. Still walked the dog past the same neighbors, who barely looked up anymore. But the quiet was different now. Not dead, watchful. There was a current in the air, like just before a summer storm. I could feel it, even if no one said anything yet. It started with a call, Just after 11 p.m. on a Thursday. The kind of hour where real emergencies happen, or people try to make something look like one. I stared at the screen for a beat before answering. The name flashing wasn't hers, but it came from her brother's number. Evan. He never called me. "Hey man," he said, voice tight, too casual. "You got a second?" I didn't say yes, just waited. There was a pause. Then, "Look, I don't want this to get messy. I know things have been complicated, but it'd be good to talk. In person, nothing official. Just to clear the air." "About what?" He hesitated. "I think you know." I kept my tone flat. "Send me a time." We met the next evening at a small bar halfway between our neighborhoods. Not one we used to go to, not one either of us had memories attached to. Neutral ground. He was already there when I walked in, nursing something brown in a short glass. He stood, too quickly, then sat before I even reached the table, nervous. "Appreciate you coming," he said. His smile didn't touch his eyes. I didn't smile back. He jumped right in. We were talking, me, Dad, and Elise, and we thought maybe we rushed things. Maybe the way everything went down wasn't fair. To you. I just looked at him. "So," he went on, adjusting his cuff like it mattered. "We've been revisiting some things, and we'd like to offer a cleaner end to it all. No more dragging stuff out. No surprises." He slid an envelope across the table. Not thick, not thin either. Inside was a new agreement. Different tone, more money, no emotional dressing, a clean payout, and, of course, a clause that would end any further inquiry on my part. "So you're buying silence again," I said quietly. No, man, it's closure. For everybody." "For her or for me?" He didn't answer. Just took a sip, eyes avoiding mine. This wasn't generosity. This was fear. They knew I'd found something. They didn't know what or how much. But it was enough to make them sweat. Enough to bring me back into the conversation they'd so carefully cut me out of. "What happens if I don't sign it?" I asked. He gave a small shrug, too rehearsed. "Nothing formal. We just hope you'll be reasonable, that you won't cause trouble." That word again. Reasonable. I'd spent my whole life being reasonable. The kid who didn't cry at funerals. The brother who gave up the bigger bedroom. The husband who accepted long silences and missed dinners as just stress. I had learned to swallow discomfort like pills, dry but manageable. "Why now?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "People talk," he said finally. "And look, we get it. You're upset. But dragging things out helps no one, especially not Elise." There it was, the real concern, her. Because if I made noise, she might have to explain things she'd rather keep buried. And I realized in that moment, this wasn't a negotiation. It was containment. Dress it up however they wanted. It was still a cage. I folded the paper back into the envelope and slid it toward him. "I'll think about it." He nodded, too quickly. "Of course. Take your time. No pressure." But there was pressure. That was the point. We left the bar separately. I didn't go straight home. Took a longer route, sat in my car outside a closed gas station, engine off, hands on the wheel. I knew what refusing meant. They'd escalate. They'd push harder, paint me as unstable or vindictive. They'd activate all the mechanisms that work behind closed doors, subtle character assassinations, planted doubts, legal smoke bombs. But accepting would mean burying the truth forever. And I wasn't ready to do that, not anymore. I got home late, didn't turn on the TV, didn't pour a drink. I just sat at the kitchen table with the envelope unopened beside me. For a long time, silence had been my shield, a way to stay safe, a way to stay unseen. But silence now, it wouldn't protect me. It would bury me. So I decided I wouldn't yell, wouldn't storm in with accusations, but I also wouldn't step back again. Next time they reached out, I'd be ready. They thought one more push would break me. They misjudged what I'd already survived. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse speeches in front of a mirror. No swelling music. No dramatic calls made from shadowed corners. It wasn't that kind of moment. This wasn't revenge. This was subtraction. A clean removal of lies that had been draped like velvet over a truth no one wanted to look at. That morning, I got dressed like I was going to a job interview. Crisp shirt, no tie, jacket pressed. I checked the envelope one last time. Papers sorted, tabs marked, names highlighted. Then I drove to Manhattan. I didn't call ahead, didn't warn them. I didn't want a meeting with Elise or her father or anyone who thought damage control was the same as morality. I walked straight into the administrative office of the licensing board and requested a formal complaint packet. No drama, just process. The receptionist handed me a clipboard. "Do you need help filling this out?" I shook my head. I brought everything. Back in a corner seat, I filled out the form. I listed names, I outlined dates, I attached copies of reports, medical, financial, legal, all consistent, all silent until someone bothered to compare them. No adjectives, no claims of betrayal, just facts. When I handed it back, she glanced at the thickness of the file. "You want to stay anonymous?" "No," I said. "I want it on record." Truth doesn't need to yell. It doesn't need punctuation. It just needs daylight. After that, I submitted copies to 2 other institutions, quiet places that don't react with gossip but with audits, ethics reviews, and procedure. No family lawyers could intercept that. No one could spin it as bitterness. Once it hit the system, it stopped being mine. It became public. By the time I got back to Westchester, the wind had picked up. I parked, sat for a moment, let the weight shift. Not gone, just placed somewhere else. The next 2 days passed without a ripple. And then, like clockwork, the air changed. First, the lawyer, who hadn't returned my calls in months, left me a voicemail. Not confrontational, curious. Then Elise's friend, the one who hadn't made eye contact since the court date, sent me a message. "Hey, can we talk?" The silence cracked. By Friday, Evan reached out again. This time, not with urgency, but something closer to caution. "I heard. There's some paperwork," he said. He sounded out of breath, like he'd been chasing a truth he assumed would stay buried. "I submitted what I had," I said flatly. He paused. "You could have come to us." I almost laughed. "You made it clear I wasn't family anymore. I didn't see the point." There was a long silence. "Look, we can still find a way to handle this, quietly. Just let me talk to Dad." That name again, Dad. The man behind every cold clause and veiled threat. The man who'd erased me with a handshake and a shrug. "I don't think it's your call anymore," I said. "And I don't think it ever should have been." He sighed. "You're gonna make this ugly." "No," I said. "I just stopped making it easy." They'd spent so long convinced I would stay quiet, that I'd keep the secrets they wrote into contracts and buried under well-timed generosity. But institutions don't care about family hierarchies. They care about records, and mine were clean. Theirs weren't. By the following week, I started noticing the shift not in calls, but in silence. Elise's medical license board issued an inquiry. Her clinic paused operations pending review. The whispers turned. The same people who once stopped inviting me to barbecues now forwarded emails like, "Have you seen this?" Or, "Did you know?" They weren't siding with me. They were backing away from her. That's when I knew. It was working. But I didn't gloat. There were no victory texts sent, no late-night emails saying, "Told you so." Because this wasn't triumph. It was just a long overdue correction. I didn't feel proud. I felt untangled, like finally setting down a weight you'd carried so long you forgot it was heavy. One afternoon, walking past the kitchen counter, I caught sight of the folder still sitting there, untouched since submission. I opened it, flipped through the pages slowly. These weren't weapons. They were acknowledgments of what I'd seen, what I'd survived, what I'd refused to carry anymore. I sealed it again, locked it away, not hidden, but no longer needed in reach. I didn't win anything that day. I just stopped losing myself. And when the noise finally died down, after the emails dried up, after the calls slowed to one-word voicemails, after the silence finally stopped feeling like punishment, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, just listening. It was the first evening in weeks that didn't feel like it was waiting for something. No threats, no apologies, no strategies, just stillness. That kind of silence doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in. The calls that once came daily started to skip days, then weeks. The same people who had once called me paranoid or passive now didn't call at all. Not to argue, not to admit, not to make things right. Just nothing. What I got instead were safe phrases, filtered through lawyers, delivered secondhand. No one said, "We were wrong." They said, "Let's not prolong this." They didn't say, "I'm sorry." They said, "Let's all move forward." Forward from what? From pretending nothing happened? I stopped expecting closure. That's not how these things end. You don't get a moment where everyone sits in a circle, holding hands, sharing truth. Some people never meet you at the truth. They just wait to see if you'll get tired of standing there alone. One morning, I got a letter. Not an email, an actual envelope. No return address. But the handwriting was Elise's. I knew it from the loops in the Y and the way she wrote my name like it didn't quite fit on the line. Inside was one sentence, not dramatic, not apologetic. Just, "I know you won't believe me, but I did what I thought I had to do." I folded the paper once, then again, and put it in the drawer under the sink, the one with expired coupons and takeout menus. I didn't need to burn it, but I wasn't going to frame it either. A few days later, Evan reached out through a mutual friend, asked if we could meet. "Nothing official," he said, "just a coffee." I agreed. We met at a small diner, the kind with cracked booths and a waitress who knows when not to ask questions. He showed up late, didn't order anything, and spent 5 minutes staring at the laminated menu before speaking. "We never thought it would get this far," he said. I looked at him, older now, somehow, but still carrying that same look he always had when he was trying to charm his way through responsibility. I didn't reply. "I guess I didn't expect you to follow through." That got a smile out of me, small and tired. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just stopped letting you all write the ending." He nodded like he understood. But if he did, he never said it. Before we left, he asked if there was anything I needed from them. I thought about it. For once, I had a real opening to ask for something. Reparations, acknowledgement, even just the truth out loud. Instead, I said, I need you to stop pretending you don't know what happened." He blinked, said nothing. That was enough. Later that week, I was walking through town, and I passed the community center. Inside was the same room where Elise once hosted a family fundraiser, polished, packed with people who smiled too much, drank too little. I glanced through the glass and saw a single chair in the back corner. Empty. Familiar. I thought about going in, sitting there, taking up space. But I didn't. I kept walking. Because that chair, like everything else I once chased, wasn't mine anymore, and I no longer needed it to be. The days that followed were slow, uneventful, beautiful in a way. I started cooking again. Grocery lists replaced legal filings. Conversations became shorter, more honest. My circle tightened, but the air inside it got lighter. I began sleeping with the window cracked open, even when it was cold. I stopped checking my phone during dinner. I deleted old voicemails without listening. The peace didn't come all at once, but it arrived. In slices. In pauses. I wasn't healed. That would be too simple a word. I still flinched when my phone rang after 9 p.m. I still skipped certain songs on the radio. I still avoided the part of town where Elise's father had his office, but I no longer carried their silence like proof. One evening, I found myself rearranging my bookshelf, something I used to do when I didn't know what else to fix. I found the old folder again, the one with the documentation, the evidence, the finality. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I put it in the back of the cabinet, behind the winter blankets and things I didn't plan to use again. Not hidden, just placed where it belonged. I sat on the edge of the couch and looked around my living room. Not decorated with intent, not Instagram-worthy, but mine. There was a chair by the window. I had picked it out months ago, simple, soft, steady. And for the first time since everything collapsed, I sat in it, not because I was waiting for someone to talk to me, or to explain themselves, or to ask me back. I just sat, facing forward. There are worse things than being asked to leave. One of them is staying where you were never meant to remain.